How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I think the time that we've been recording has been exciting. I kind of feel a little more rejuvenated in terms of just kind of getting recordings in. It will come into mid-December, so I'm sure we'll have some hard times kind of with the holidays and everything. But yeah, I'm excited, and this topic is one that is dear and close to my heart, and I'm excited to just kind of dive into it.
Awesome. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about boundaries, how to set boundaries, what boundaries to set, how to say no. So those are all things that we're going to be covering today, which I think is really important. And, I think no matter what level you're at, whether you're entry level or senior level, we all need to have boundaries set. We have to take that for ourselves. We have to prioritize ourselves, our families, whatever it might be. And so I'll share some things that I've learned the hard way, and I'll share some things as a supervisor, like, ooh, I need my people to set boundaries, but ooh, when they do it this way, it kind of hurts a little bit. So we'll kind of cover all different categories of that. But I guess just to kind of get started, is there a story that you have top of mind that, like, either you set a boundary and this was the benefit of it, or a time where you're like, man, I really should have set a boundary because I didn't, this happened?
I don't know if there is like a specific story that comes to mind, but I feel like I've over the years I've made it a big point of just again work. We have 4 kids now, so life is busy, and I mean they're growing fast. I work from home, so I'm sure you and everyone that worked through the pandemic can understand how hard it is to like shut down at the end of the day. You could just keep working and not really think too much about it. But I feel like I've been pretty good at just being done at 5. I think that's kind of my just hard boundary. Unless we have a present deadline and we need to like finish something that day, and I'm working with someone else that we're coordinating, I'm pretty good at just saying 5 p.m. rolls around, I'm off, shut down the computer, and just kind of go have dinner, play with the kids. Sometimes they have activities in the evening. So that's one that is kind of easy to like think about. I think another one is just in terms of vacation. My wife and I love to travel. We love to travel with our kids, and we take pretty frequent vacations. I mean, we use all of our PTO. We are pretty adamant of, especially when there was a limit to the PTO, like planning out, hey, I'm gonna take some time off here, like watching the accrual process and all that stuff, making sure that I was not like taking everything during the first month of the year, but just kind of taking that time to really spend time with family and just kind of deconnect, like reset from work in general, like not bring work to the vacation. I think it's been great, and yeah, I think that's kind of those two examples. I'll touch on that a little bit because I struggle a lot. I used to have email on my phone for work and chat and everything, so I'm like trying not to check it. And with Jacobs recently, there's a lot of like it's kind of block off. You cannot access it as easy just because you have to like enter your code and you have to do all these security things that almost put a little bit of friction to put it on the phone. So a lot of times the password expires, so I get logged out. Like it's gonna be a pain, like 5 minutes to log in, so I don't even have it anymore. I only have the chat on my phone, so I'm not checking email. And honestly, it's been fine. I mean, I don't notice really any difference in terms of like not people not being able to reach me. I'm usually at my desk when I'm working, so if someone needs me from 8 to 5, I'm at my desk and I can reply to them. But that's kind of a um, unintended kind of thing that happened just because it was kind of hard to get it on my phone. And yeah, I don't have email on my phone for work, and it's just kind of the weekends go by. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on at work. Like sometimes I get emails over the weekend and kind of try to check them, but yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of weird feeling like free, but at the same time, like before, I was like so obsessed with just like checking email, make sure I was like on top of things. So I don't know if you have anything like that too, that you kind of try to stay connected as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like as I've grown in my career and move up into different roles, I definitely feel like I don't want to lose that connection. When I'd go on PTO, I do a pretty good job of disconnecting. I did go to Colorado a few months ago with my family, and I'm a pretty early riser, and so I brought my laptop, and I did do about 2 to 3 hours of work kind of before they woke up even, or before we got ready for breakfast. And for me, it was kind of nice because then I didn't fall so far behind being off for 5 days, and it didn't interact or interfere with them, and didn't interfere with our plans. It didn't like I wasn't prioritizing work. I just figured I'm awake and I don't want to read a book or do nothing, so I did work. I truly do. It's kind of a hard one for me because I really do like working. I like what I do, especially when I'm using my strengths and working with those. I just kind of can lose track of time. So for me, when it comes to work, I do tend to work a little extra, but there are times where I need to set boundaries. And even yesterday, I had a meeting where. Uh, there's a project that's a perfect fit for me to go after. And I said, if I do that, I have to say no to these other things. If I do this, I am not available for that. But speaking up and being clear about the boundary and the expectation, and if they're okay with that, and they're like, okay, yeah, we want you to go after that project. We want it to be successful and hopefully we win it. But if we do, we know that we have to find an alternative for these other things that you're working on, then we're good. And if they say no, then I just have to say and be strong. If I have to determine, do I want to make that sacrifice for a few months and or longer, however long it is, and just say, okay, we're going to do everything, or do I say I can't, and they'll respect that decision. And so when you're working with good people, they will respect those decisions. um, and then we go from there. But I'm curious, before we kind of move on into like what kind of boundaries to set and stuff like that. You're saying that you kind of log off at 5, or that you don't really have these connections to your phone right now, which is great. I think that's awesome. Did you communicate that directly with your supervisor? Or is it just something that has happened and nobody's really questioned it? I'm just curious.
So I think that's a great point. I don't think anyone expects me to be working on weekends. I think if I'm expected to work after 5, I will be working. If I have a deadline that, hey, we need to finish this by the end of the day, 5 rolls around, and this has already happened. I mean, the short time I've been at Jacobs, it already happens in terms of, hey, we need to finish this today. It needs to go out. And obviously, if I was like, hey, I'm off at 5, I don't care what happens. I'm just gonna be off at 5. You guys figure out between 5 and 7:30 when I can get back to looking at this. There hasn't been like a specific say, hey, I'm off at 5. That's my boundary. Like, there's nothing really like that. And it's kind of, again, it's almost like my responsibility to know we have a deadline today. I cannot just be done at 5. So I talk to my wife and say, hey, I need to finish this today. I'm gonna be a little later, maybe 6, maybe 7, until I can come up and be done. But in terms of like communicating to my supervisor or people at work, it's not been an issue because I haven't like let it be an issue, if that makes sense. If we were in a deadline and I'm just gonna disappear at 5, then I think that's when it becomes an issue. I don't think it. I mean, if I communicate, I don't think there's gonna be anything bad about it in terms of just. I don't have email on my phone just because it's sometimes hard to log in, and I'm not checking it on the weekends, which I don't think really anyone is expecting me to. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where that has just kind of naturally landed. I don't think there's been kind of a formal communication here. These are my boundaries. These are some of the things that are happening.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I guess from your perspective, like, how do you feel about that?
So I think it's a little unique with you because you just started at this new role.
Mhm.
And so your early habits kind of just speak for themselves and show what your boundaries are. If you had been working for years in a place and all of a sudden you say, I really should be setting some boundaries, that's going to be a little different, and maybe a conversation should be had with the supervisor. If I have somebody on my team who I know I can get a hold of them after hours, I know I can text them or send a message on Teams anytime and they'll respond. And then all of a sudden it just stops. I'm not mad necessarily that I am not getting access to them at 7 p.m., but it was a routine, it was a habit that had kind of been established. So if they now want to set a boundary, having that conversation, just maybe as uncomfortable as it might be, it's really not, but you might feel it's uncomfortable. That does go a long ways. because it's just I got used to something and now I need to adjust as a supervisor or as a lead. I need to know who I need to adjust with. So, for anybody listening who's been at a job for a couple years and now you're thinking, "Oh, I need to make a change." Know that proactive uh, communication will be appreciated. Okay, so there are lots of different types of boundaries. Obviously, at the end of the day, it kind of comes to our own work-life balance. What do we need to take care of ourselves? But there are, that might be time related, work hour related, how much vacation time you want to take. It could be related to what projects you get put on or what roles and responsibilities you're given. If you're a 3-year person and somebody's trying to push you into a supervisory role, you may not feel ready for that. And setting the boundary of, hey, I'm just not there yet. I cannot take this on, um, may be important. Maybe they see something in you, and that's awesome. I think that's great. But if you don't feel ready, then make sure to voice that. I worked with somebody who is an incredible, incredible engineer, very intelligent, very smart, very thorough, always got the job done. And for years, he just said, I do not want to be a project manager. I'll do the technical stuff all day, but do not ever force me to be a project manager. And so I felt like that was great. He set that boundary. There were probably times where we wish we could put him as a project manager, because we needed it. And honestly, we felt he probably was the best fit for it. He's really good. But that was very important to him to set that boundary. And I've never seen anybody try to force him otherwise. So again, setting boundaries is really taking care of ourselves. But in order to set boundaries, we need to know about ourselves. We need to know what our priorities and values are. We need to know, what do we want? I mean, are we okay with some soft boundaries where it's like you said, a project is due. I'm not going to leave the team hanging. I'll work after 5 o'clock if absolutely needed. Or is it, hey, every day at 5 o'clock, I need to take my mom to the hospital for her chemo treatment or something major like that, and that's like a non-negotiable. You cannot look at your computer after 5 o'clock, right? So like you gotta just be clear. So I think step one for everybody is just understand yourself. Get clear on what you want. Maybe you're in a different phase. And I want to be careful with this because I don't want to make it sound like if you're single without kids, you should be expected to work longer hours, because that's absolutely not true. Everybody needs to set boundaries. Now, you may have more margin, you may have more time, but that does not mean it should be spent at work. So please, everybody, hear me when I say this. But maybe your circumstances change and your responsibilities change. And, Luis, you have 4 kids now. Like, your life is way different now than it was, so many years ago with 0 kids. And so it's not necessarily like the kids that are making this change, but you just have different responsibilities. You have a different schedule outside of work. Maybe it's not going to hang out with friends, but you're taking little Timmy to the baseball game, whatever it is. So just look at, what chapter of life are you in, and maybe make a pivot. I talk about that when we talk about goals. Even, goals, we love goals, but maybe your life circumstances changed over the last few years and you can't do this because you just have different responsibilities. So any other boundaries that I didn't cover that maybe you've seen? I think I covered them all. I just want to make sure we ask before we move on.
No, I think that's great, and I like kind of the almost like a step, like a 3-step process. I think that's in my mind. I just kind of helps me understand, like, hey, these are some of the things I need to do next, 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 next. So setting the non-negotiables, like starting with your kind of what we talk about goals, like what is your goal, like what is your like ideal day or week or year or whatever you want to look at, and planning according to that. So again, for me, is spending time with family is important. So at 5, I'm gonna be done unless you have an important deadline, and it's okay to have those exceptions. Um, Obviously, I mean, I love my job. I don't want to really leave anyone hanging. So that's important to me as well. But if I don't have to be at work at 5:30, 6 p.m., I'm not going to be, because I want to be with my kids. I want to spend time with them. I think another one is just, again, like we talk about vacation. And again, if you're single, I think that's even more important to set those boundaries, because it's funny, but it's really like interesting to see how at companies, especially if you are working with someone with kids, and I saw this and was communicated, either to me and just kind of as company hall before at our older firm. Sometimes you can expect the people that don't have any kids or family to like take on more responsibility, which is definitely not okay. Uh, or expect the employees with parents and with kids or that are parents to take less and maybe like not give them as much opportunities. So either side is like not the best option. Like going to either extreme is not okay. I think that's where kind of having that clear communication, kind of that step, the second step, just kind of communicating clearly. Hey, these are my boundaries. Maybe I'm okay with traveling frequently. My family is okay with that. Maybe sometimes I bring them with, and that works out. Maybe I'm not okay traveling, and as little travel as possible is best for me. But having that clear communication, I think it's super important. And the
Yeah.
last step, I think you touched on it, was just kind of maintaining that clear communication and keeping the consistency of this week I'm gonna be done at 5, but like next week I'm just gonna start being done at 4. Then the weeks after that it's gonna be at 6, and nobody's really gonna know when you're gonna be working or expect you to be working, and that's almost even worse because now you have no trust. Especially like me, if I'm working remote full time and people don't know if I'm working or not, that's going to be start being a problem. People don't see me at the office. If they reach out to me during working hours, I'm not going to be working. That could become an issue if I don't. Hey, I'm going to be off because I have something going on with family, or I'm going to be uh, unavailable for the next couple of hours while I take care of something. I think having that clear communication, and more important, I think the consistency, like we were talking about, I think is super
Mhm.
critical.
Yeah, I mean, so you and I work in the consulting world. Not everybody does. A lot of people work for the clients themselves or the agencies. So, uh, even where you work makes a difference. I do kind of go back to a lot of times the example of uh, different careers, different jobs, the expectations, the responsibilities. They're tied to that specific field, and you chose that field, and that's what we have to do. And then the example there is like teaching. I love teachers. I think every single teacher is underpaid. Unfortunately, the teacher role pays this amount, right? And if you go there and you're like, why don't they pay me 5 times the amount that they pay me? Well, I don't know why they don't pay you 5 times the amount, but that's just what they paid, and we all knew that going into that job. Should it be more? Sure, but that's just what the job pays. As a consultant, our work really does revolve around the needs of our clients, right? And they have schedules. Maybe there's a funding source that expires in June 30th. And if you don't get that project done, they are going to miss out on millions of dollars. We go into this consulting world knowing these expectations and knowing that, okay, we're going to have pretty good work life balance. We're going to have good pay. We're going to have good other things. But like, we chose the consulting world, and there are some things that no matter what I want in my own personal life, there are some things that I have to kind of mold to the consulting world. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
that can sometimes push people off a little bit, or a lot of people will disagree with me, but that's just my personal opinion.
No,
So
I agree. I think that's taking that into consideration as well. I mean, if you think of like doctors are on call, like you expect to be on call. Like if it's midnight and you're on call, I'm like, well, I'm not really technically at work. I'm just gonna go have a few drinks and just gonna do
right.
something else. I think that could start being a problem. Same with, I mean, I can think of like people that work maybe like maintenance overnights, or like, I don't know. There's a lot of fields. I'm kind of just looking outside of engineering where when you go in, you are expected to do these things, and that's
Right.
kind of where disappointment kind of comes into play. Like when those expectations are either not set, and kind of you come with no expectations and it's not what you expected. Like that's when you start feeling that disappointment and kind of feeling
Yeah.
bad. Um, But again, I don't think that that's usually the case. When if we are, I guess if you're proactive and you come to these situations where you expect, or at least you set the expectations yourself to manage your boundaries and your priorities and everything. So that's kind of an important kind of caveat of that. Like setting those boundaries is almost as important as just kind of the boundaries themselves, and clearly communicating and kind of setting them together either with your supervisor or whoever you're working with, even at your home. Like who is expected to do the dishes? Like if I'm expected to do dishes and I don't do them, then that's when things start going wrong. So setting the expectation, I think, is almost like the most important part of, or just kind of setting the boundaries. Like communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yeah, and for me, I have people that I know I can rely on over 40 hours because they've told me like, "Hey, anything you give me, this is what I want to do. I want to put everything into my career. I really don't have things outside of work to do, so give it to me if we have overtime." And then I have others that are saying very clearly that I cannot do over 40 hours. But there's the conversation of depending on their role. If it's an EIT, I'm pretty flexible. I mean, I wish I had more EITs who are a little bit more willing to do a little extra or willing to do the overtime because I think back on my career and I see the people I look up to, and nobody really became great at anything in a single 40-hour week or just doing 40 hours, right? Like that's the bare minimum. Sometimes it feels like. Sometimes I did investing into my career by learning things outside of work hours. And there are people who say, well, I'm absolutely not going to do that. I'm going to bill every single hour that I'm learning or working or whatever it is. And like I get that. I have to honor that work style or boundary for them, but I do tell my team that hey, if 40 hours or whatever that hour limit is for you, 80 to 90% of the time, I'm going to be helping you honor that and not ask you to go above and beyond. My only ask is because we're in the consulting world, we don't have the freedom of setting all of the schedules ourselves, and sometimes they're dictated to us.
Hmm.
My ask is that when we need it, you say yes, and that's how I approach it. So it's kind of a little different. We're talking about setting boundaries, and I'm now trying to tell my team, I appreciate your boundary, but I need this from you. But it is a give and take thing because that's
Yeah,
another thing I see so often now is, and I'm not trying to say all young people. This is really everybody. I've talked to senior people like this too, but mostly it's coming from the younger people. Is they come in, they demand these boundaries, they're making these demands on what they want in their career, and there's no give and take at all.
hmm,
And for me, I'm happy to oblige and do what their request is, but if there's no give and take on their part, it makes it harder for me to want to help them. Does that make sense?
yeah.
So I would say when you are setting boundaries, keep that in mind because if it's just me, 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 well, I'm gonna, keep you around. But as soon as we find people that are like the team type of people,
Hmm.
I'm gonna gravitate towards them a little bit more than the me people. So definitely keep that in mind when you're setting the boundaries.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, and I think that's almost a boundary on itself. Like you're kind of setting that expectation to start with, and there's nothing wrong about that. Like, again, we are in an industry, and we just kind of let's dive a little bit deeper into just engineering specifically. And I think you and I in consulting, more specifically, I worked in construction before. Again, consulting as well. So these like two different sectors. Uh, but you are kind of expected to kind of get your stuff done. Sometimes you have a flurry of projects that just need to be done by the end of the week, and sometimes you're like, I have a one project that needs to be done for that doesn't need to be done for another couple of weeks. So having those communications, I think, is super important, and I love that you and are proactive and talk about that in the first place. I think just being interested in just kind of having that specific communication with your team, saying, "Hey, I know we said we're gonna just be working 40 hours a week, but this week specifically, we need to finish this thing. I know it's gonna take us 45 hours, 50 hours, whatever it is." And having that clear communication with them, I think that's incredibly valuable. And I think that's kind of just being part of a team in general. Like sometimes you cover for someone else, sometimes someone is gonna cover for you. But if you're not giving, like you said, there's not gonna be a lot of other people giving to you as well. So I think that's kind of where I see it is you're just part of a team, and it's like if you were part of a family. If I never really do anything for my wife, I will expect her to really do little for me because that's it's kind of that relationship in terms of like um, we're in this together. And sometimes it's my turn to do a little sacrificing. Sometimes it's your turn to do a little sacrificing. So that's kind of how I see it. And I love that you're just proactive on just kind of having that expectation clearly stated.
Keeping track of, okay, that person, and I'm keeping track. It's definitely none of that. It's just we want people who are willing to jump in when needed, and we
Yeah.
want people who care about other people enough that when they see their teammate working till 10 o'clock at night for 3 months in a row, that they probably by night five, they're like, hey, what can I do to help? I know I have this boundary, but boy, I care about you enough. I want to help, right? So like, there's that. Um, so talking to your boss about these are kind of your work hours, that's great. Having I'm not going to have these things on my phone. I'm not going to access my email on my phone. That's great. I actually have people like that. But when a project was absolutely critical the last month before a deadline, I asked them, I was like, hey, can I text you? And I ask, and if they told me no, I would have honored that too. But I asked them, hey, you are a leader of this project. We are trying to do our best to keep your boundary uh, honored. But if I need something, I need to text you. And they said, okay, for this month, then let's do it, and then we will lose that method of communication after the project. And I honored that. So I do appreciate some flexibilities when needed, but again, that kind of goes to the nature of our work. Some people hate saying no. When
Could be a
I
podcast on its own.
yeah I so if we'll cover it real quick though, just saying no is awkward, right? Like if your boss comes to you and you're like no, that's not really the best way to say no. But one framework that I was taught a long time ago that I appreciate, and I appreciate when people do it to me, is they thank you for the opportunity. So if somebody asks me to do something and I can't, thank you for considering me. Thanks for thinking that this was a good fit for me. Whatever it is, you're expressing some gratitude in the moment. Then it has to be a very clear no. I cannot do that, or it is not a good time for me to do this. But then offering alternative of, but I could do that for you next month or next quarter, or so and so is light on work and they can do that. Whatever it is. That's a kind of a three-step way to say no. If that though even makes you uncomfortable and you still can't say no, I love this story from an old coworker of mine that our boss was giving her way too much work. Just everything just kept dumping on her plate. I mean, she was drowning in work and she wasn't saying no. And so she came up with the idea of every time the boss came in and gave something new, a new task, a new assignment, a new whatever, calculations, she wrote it on a post-it note and put it up on her board. And after a couple weeks, the board was like totally full of things. And when she would complete one, she'd pull it down, but she did that. And finally the boss goes, What are all these sticky notes up here for? And she said, well, these are all of the things that you've given me over the last 2 weeks. And he goes, no way, just like he didn't even realize that he had done that. And she goes, yeah, one way for me to track it is I've been putting up on this board, and when I complete it, I take these off. And he goes, that is way too much. I've given you way too much. Let me take a few of these things. And so he took a few of those sticky notes and said, these are no longer your concern. And he did that. Now, 2 weeks didn't necessarily have to go by for that conversation to happen. If she had just said, hey, you're giving me too much. What is the priority? But that strategy worked, and it's a little more passive that I would encourage you. But again, just hearing stories and seeing where you're at, maybe you're uncomfortable. I promise you, I have really not worked with any bosses, even bosses who have not necessarily been super nice to me or had some screaming matches at me or whatever. Like I've had some not so great leaders. But even then, when I said, "Hey, this is too much work," everybody kind of said, okay, who can we get to help? So keep that in mind, to be more proactive and less passive on the conversation.
I
I
love that
feel like
story. I
there's
just want to touch on just something just quick. I think what you said is this could have been done a conversation 2 weeks ago. Again, I think a lot of these issues and expectations and boundaries kind of boil down a lot of issues just overall in terms of just kind of your work and how you manage your things. It just kind of boils down to communication. If you
yes,
have poor communication, you're gonna struggle a lot to get through the day, through the week, through projects, through conversations, through meetings, to anything. And it may be uncomfortable at the beginning, especially if you don't know that person very well. If it's like a new company, if you they just kind of put you into a client meeting, it's gonna be uncomfortable. But that's kind of part of just being a adult. I feel like just being uncomfortable and still just kind of having the clear mind to just communicate what the problems are. And if you are not communicating, then you're just gonna start failing people and just kind of struggle to really, especially if they expect you to get something done and you don't communicate it and the day comes around and it's not done, then you're going to start having the problems. But if you have those conversations early on, I think that's one of the easiest ways to resolve a lot of those.
yeah. Yeah, you're right. It totally boils down to communication, being proactive, and just being open to have that conversation. The last point I wanted to make on the boundary setting, though, is you don't have to tell somebody reasons why you make a decision. Um, I will say it does help. So let me backtrack on that. But like, if you need a day off, you don't have to say it's for my mental health or it's because I just don't want to work today or I have to take my kid to the doctor. Like you don't have to say any of that. So just keep that in mind that a good manager will just say, "Okay, I trust you." But that trust has had to have been established, right? That kind of goes back to the give and take. When somebody tells me no on something, it is way easier to accept that no when that trust is already there. And I know that they're gonna give me 100% otherwise. But yeah, they need to tell me no right now, and that's fine. But you don't have to give reasons why you're doing something. But I will say we are human beings. We are emotional creatures. We do care about people, and everybody should hopefully care about people that they work with. So if you did say, "Hey, it is for a personal thing," or for I'm going out of town, or hey, I'm going on another vacation, or whatever it might be, that does go a long ways for me because I care about the people outside of work just as much as I do inside of work, and because it's all connected. And when that person is having a fun day, even they're just like, "Hey, I'm just gonna take the day off and go golfing." One, I get a little jealous, but the two, it's like great. I know that they're gonna go, they're gonna get refreshed and revived and come back to work after a day off and just kind of get back into it. Now, if they do that the week of a submittal, I'm going to cringe a lot more. And I ask them, hey, be a little bit more mindful of where you're leaving the project and where you're leaving people. So when you're setting those boundaries, again, the give and take, having the team mentality of, okay, I'm going to do this for me, but my team could use this, or I'm not going to do it and leave them hanging the week before submittal, or whatever that is. Just keep those things in mind. I think if we set the boundaries with all of that in mind, things are going to go well. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was gonna say like just to like summarize, just kind of the boundary conversation can be hard, especially if you are new to a company. But I'd like to just kind of set it in just kind of these three steps. Just kind of identify the non-negotiables. We touch on how, again, for me, 5 p.m. is kind of family time, and kind of just having that expectation to come in, just kind of doing the planning. And at the last episode, I'll try to link to just kind of your goals, like what are the boundaries you need in order to accomplish your goals? What are your
Hmm.
non-negotiables? Then step two, just kind of communication clearly and early, like what you talk about. A lot of issues can stem from poor communication. So don't be afraid to just hey take time, especially if you're new at a company, or like you said, if you have done something for a long time and you want to change it in terms of your boundaries, like communicate it. The worst thing is just change something and just kind of out of the blue um, start being unavailable during certain hours and just kind of maybe working weird hours and whatnot. If you communicate that, there's going to be a way to make it work a lot of times. And then the last thing, you just can maintain that consistency, like where you talk about just again
Hmm.
staying consistent. Like for me, I'm always on a 5, and I think people kind of start to see that, hey, if you text me after 5, I may or may not may respond back. If we are on a deadline, I'm going to, and that's clearly stated. Uh, but just maintaining that consistency, I think it's key. And at the end of the day, if you show that you are able to get through your work week, you may have, and I remember this from kind of an older colleague, they used to have just weird hours, like working from like 6 a.m. to like 2 p.m. and then being off for a few hours because they love going fishing or outdoor stuff, and then maybe work a little bit in the evening. But that was clearly communicated, was stated, was understood, and they were getting through the week just fine, getting everything done. And that was not a problem. If I were to start doing that out of the blue, not tell anyone, and then you start seeing that my work is not the same as before, they need me to attend meetings, but I'm not going to be available during those times, then you're going to start having those issues. So communication is super important. And like I said, it's one of the things that solve a lot of the issues that you have. And it's just kind of an easy thing to just add to your routine, even just kind of maybe even like write down your projects for the day, or for the week, early in the week, and maybe like check, hey, do I have everything I need to complete everything I have for this week? Maybe just send a message to your supervisor or your team saying, I need these things to accomplish my work this week. And that way you can look at your schedule, set those boundaries. Maybe they change that week specifically, you have something going on. I mean, we're in the Christmas season, kids have activities, kids have Christmas programs, all of that, and you just kind of stay on top of that. I think that's going to be a great way to um, really either communicate that or just kind of set those boundaries. I don't want to say responsibly because that sounds strange, but in a way that everyone is kind of aware of what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think if I were to kind of leave the conversation with one last thought is going back to kind of the where if you're in the consulting side, know that you chose that side,
Yep.
and there are certain expectations and responsibilities that we have. Boundaries are great and they are absolutely are needed. But just remember that and make sure that you're being fair and you're being a team player. And then the last tip would be boundaries are really important and you need them for yourself, for your family, for your health, mental, emotional, and physical. But also just work is work, and it's not entirely everything else. It's not life. So boundaries are important, and every time you say yes to something at work, you're probably going to have to say no to something at home.
Hmm.
And so keeping that in mind, and this is why boundaries are important, is it gives you that guardrail to say, okay, I'll say yes to everything within that boundary. But once it crosses that, my immediate reaction will be a no.
Hmm.
Um, if there's a submittal, yeah, okay, let me think about it. Let me talk to my family. Can we make a short-term sacrifice? Um, but yeah, I mean, just that's why we need it, because it gives that guardrail of these are the things that I'm okay to say no to, and you establish that with your manager. And when they hear no in that situation, they're like, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
We crossed that line, and we're not going to expect you to do this. So that would be what I would leave the conversation with.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining me today, Nicolai. This was great. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, you're gonna love the content we have over our newsletter. Every issue comes packed with information about the episode that we recorded, giving you detailed action items as well as just reflection on some of the things that you could apply in your career, in your life. And I always enjoy sitting down on a Sunday, Saturday sometimes, and writing down each newsletter. Comes packed with a lot of information, a lot of links, a lot of great lessons and knowledge that we share both in the podcast, but I'll try to go a little deeper into that connection. So if you are interested in that at all, go to luisfelipeduque.com/newsletter. All the information is there. I'm excited for the podcast and where it's going. So I want you to know about that resource as well. Nicolai and I put a lot of effort in the podcast, and we're enjoying the conversations. And as well, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, go to the link in the description below or luisfelipeduque.com/contact, and let's connect. We're happy to provide you with all the information you need, and always excited to have that conversation as well. Thank you, Jack Winters, for the music. And as always, let's continue engineering our future.